Welcome, everyone. We will begin. And Dina, I'll send it off to you. Um, Dina, to start off the presentation.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Mario. Welcome, everyone, to our workshop. This workshop is called Revisiting Homeschool Pedagogies during COVID-19. And we would like to introduce ourselves this morning. I hope everybody enjoyed this workshop. I will start introducing myself. My name is Dina Aulet, and I'm a Puerto Rican daughter and mother with two young children, and I have faced many challenges when it comes to caring for them. I'm a Latina daughter, the first in her family to graduate from college, also complete a bachelor degree in sociology and biology, and pursue a master's degree as a physician assistant, while caring for my mother, who was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. My personal experience had told me about the difficulty minority, my personal experience had told me about the difficulty minority communities face when navigating the healthcare system or finding any support within the community for themselves or their children. As a bilingual Latina woman, I consider myself a teacher, a learner, and also a leader and an advocate. I never imagined that part of my research as an undergraduate student will involve in educating different minority communities about how to talk to the doctors, how to ask questions, the importance of having an annual physical, and discussing colorectal cancer screening. As a daughter, I identify with individuals who remind me my own mother who had to work 2 jobs to provide for themselves and their family. And also as a mother, I identify with individuals who have hard time accessing to the health care different communities. Now I'm gonna pass it to Mary Jo and she can introduce herself.
Thank you, Dina. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I am Mary Jo Rendon. I was born in Guatemala and came to the US at the age of 10. I grew up in the Philadelphia area, and I've been working in education for nearly 30 years. I've been teaching EFL, English as a foreign language, in Spain. I've worked with curricula and designing programs, and I currently work at the Waltham Public Schools, and I work in the Dropout Prevention Office. For the past 9 years, I've been using family and community engagement as a strategic and vital intervention. I am currently coordinating a new competency-based program called the Youth Opportunity Institute for low-income and overage students. Berta, on to you.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Dan, if you could actually go to the next slide, everybody will be able to see our names and our roles. So hi, everybody. My name is Berta Padilla. I was born in Waltham, Massachusetts, where I currently work as a bilingual school counselor at the high school alongside with Mary Jo. I come from a very big and strong Guatemalan family. I actually grew up in Guatemala for part of my childhood before coming back to the States to begin my public education. I am a first generation high school and college graduate in my family. And then, like I mentioned, I currently work as a bilingual school counselor at the high school, where I primarily work with our English language learner population, and where we welcome our new families and students who have recently arrived to the US, primarily from Central America. So before we begin our workshop, we actually wanted to take a minute to get to know you all a little bit better and to see what roles you play in your schools or in your communities. So we wanted to take a minute for you to fill out a poll to just tell us whether you work at the elementary school level, middle school level, or high school level, or what role you play in your community.
Waiting for one more, about 10 seconds.
Awesome. So thank you everybody for sharing. It's pretty good mix. I see we have a lot of elementary school level educators here with us, which is actually good because right at the elementary levels where we start a lot of the connections between our families and the schools. But you know, obviously it's important to keep that communication and trust very strong all through their public education. So it's good to see where everybody is coming from. Thank you. So next slide, please, Dan. So again, thank you everyone for being here with us today. I'm going to quickly cover our agenda for what we're going to be talking about today. We began by introducing ourselves, and in the next slide, we're going to cover our goals and the purpose for our session today. During our time together, we want you all to reflect and think about your roles as educators in terms of how you relate and connect with your families. We want you to do this in two ways: what those relationships looked like before COVID-19 and what they will look like once we return to school this fall, which we know is going to be a little bit different. We will be utilizing the ecological spheres theory as our base and really want to highlight the challenges between the home-school relationship building. As we shift focus in the second part of our session, we want to really talk about what we're going to be facing this fall. We really want you to think creatively of ways to connect with your families and brainstorm ways we can strengthen the homeschool communications and trust in our districts. We will have time for questions before our breakout session, so we ask that you please just jot down your questions on the side until we get to this point, and we will hopefully have good conversation then about what questions you have. Next slide, please, Dan. So why are we here today? The purpose of our session is to understand family engagement using Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. We want to use his ecological spheres to identify the challenges in building purposeful two-way dialogues between the school community and the home. We want you all to hone in on your own communities and think about ways we can improve communication between your students' school life and their home life. We want you to leave here today with an action plan specific to your community that starts to build capacity in the home, school, and community partnerships of your students and their families' lives. Next slide, please. So let's begin. We're going to start by reflecting on our experiences pre-COVID-19 and exploring Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. Mary Jo will now walk you all through this theory and framework.
Thank you, Berta. So here we have the ecological model, and family engagement looks very differently in many contexts and is understood differently by many of us. One way of looking and understanding family engagement is through Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which focuses on child development and views the child holistically. The theory is represented by concentric circles that surround the child. Keep in mind that while the circles are independent of each other, the child who is at the center of the circles is greatly impacted by people who espouse value systems and who interact within and across the different spheres. This includes all of us present in this workshop today and begs a silent question: who am I in relation to the students and their ecological systems? The circles we have here in the slides are labeled youth, family, neighborhood, and society. The youth sphere is where the child has direct interaction with family, peers, and adults in after-school programs. The next sphere, family, includes social interactions between or among individuals in a more intimate environment. This may include the school, the church, in relationship to home life. In our context, this could involve a meeting between a parent and an educator that may influence relationships of the child. A third sphere is the neighborhood, which consists of external forces that influence the child's development. The child does not have direct contact with these forces, yet they indirectly affect the child. For example, parents' work schedules can interfere with attending school events or meeting with a guidance teacher or a counselor. Or the lack of funding in schools can create larger ESL classrooms that may impact a student's language development. Law enforcement, city agencies, housing, and curricula are examples of other structures that lie in this sphere. Society is the final sphere, which includes broad cultural and political and social values and rules that influence a child. This sphere provides the resources and opportunities or the constraints such that will affect the child and the family. For example, state and federal policies such as the Student Opportunity Act, eviction moratorium, and current attitudes towards immigration have serious implications on how students and families of color experience the American educational system. Next slide, please, Dan. Bronfenbrenner's theory influenced scholars doing research on family engagement. One such scholar is Joyce Epstein at Johns Hopkins University. Epstein has written a lot on her theory of overlapping spheres of influence of school, family, and community on children's learning. It is based on the idea that the three spheres, school, family, and community, affect the lives of children. Each sphere can exist independently or they can overlap. The more the spheres overlap, the greater a partnership and the greater the opportunities for children to succeed. In other words, students' learning is heightened when parents, educators, and community members work together with the purpose of promoting student success. Based on the concept of social interaction, the theory of overlapping spheres recognizes the need for parents, educators, and community members to understand each other's perspectives, identify goals for student achievement, and value each other's contribution toward student learning. We hope you all received the handouts prior to this workshop. One worksheet asked you to identify the adults in your student's ecological sphere to understand the degree to which supports around the child overlap. We hope you've had some time to look at this sheet, and if not, no worries. Berta will walk us through these spheres from her lens of the theory of overlapping spheres of influence in her life as a student in the public school system. Berta?
All right, next slide, please, Dan. Thank you. So thank you, Mary Jo. As I began to draft out my spheres, I couldn't decide what stage of my life to represent, but I decided to focus on my life as a young adult in the Waltham community, which is where I grew up and where I'm fortunate enough to work today. As you can see in my home sphere, I put in low income, huge Latinx family. I also put in long hard worked hours because my parents worked a lot of hours when I was younger, and they still do to this day. I also put 6+ family members living together in one household. I grew up in the project, so it was a pretty small apartment, and there was 6 of us, me and my 3 siblings and my parents. Spanish speaking, and then Guatemalan traditions and values are very strong in my home. For school, I wrote down Waltham Public Schools because it's where I went through my education system. Some people that had a very big impact in my life through school, in the school community, was primarily just my guidance counselor in high school. He played a really huge role in my life. You know, I got involved in sports, school plays, the National Honor Society, and many mentor programs, and those were really big impacts in my life while I was in school in Waltham. And then for my community sphere, I wrote down Waltham because it's where I grew up. The First Lutheran Church, I got introduced to First Lutheran when I was in 4th grade, and I was part of the children's choir. I met Pastor Mail there, who still has a really big impact in my life. He's one of the biggest mentors in my life, and he was pretty great. So that's one of the things in my community sphere. St. Mary's Church, Catholicism is the main religion for Guatemalans, I feel. So my parents did attend this Catholic church for a bit, and we still go once in a while. And it also played a big part in my life. Moody Street is downtown Waltham, and it's where I spent a lot of my time as a young adult. So I also put that in there. The Boys and Girls Club, the Projects, which is where I grew up. In the projects, I met Olga Olmedo, who is from Puerto Rico. She was basically our community leader in the projects. She was the one who kind of gathered me and a group of friends and brought us down to First Lutheran when we were young. I remember it was a Wednesday night. She said, you know, there's a church down the street. Let's go. They give free dinner Wednesday nights, and then they have the youth choir. And, you know, since that very first day, I continued to go to First Lutheran with her and her kids and some other kids from the neighborhood. And it became really a second home for me. And then I put the public library, church camp, because I went to church camp through First Lutheran. We did many volunteer programs through First Lutheran as well. So that's how I became more involved in the community as well. So those are my spheres. And as you can see, the connection between my family and the community sphere is strong. They're interacting. The Latinx presence is, and is for as long as I can remember, has been very strong in Waltham. My family is very big, and many settled in Waltham in the early 90s. And so as I grew up, the values and beliefs of our culture were very present. We, either my parents and I or my friends and I, would spend a lot of time strolling down Moody Street, as you can see it highlighted in my community sphere, where you could find La Chapincita, which is one of the first Guatemalan-owned businesses in Waltham. And we would always go there to get some Guatemalan goodies and treats to enjoy. As I reflect on this, I realize this is where my family felt most comfortable to be, because we could always find someone who spoke Spanish, whether it was inside the store or just strolling down Moody Street. You could feel the Latino presence, and this provided a blanket of security and welcoming for us. Towards the end of elementary school, when my family moved into the local housing community, the projects. And that's where I met a lot of my lifelong friends and became connected to First Lutheran Church. My spheres of community and family became even stronger at this time. The pastor of the church, Pastor Male, as I mentioned before, is a white male born and raised in the United States. He was getting ready to go on sabbatical with his wife and 2 kids to El Salvador. He and his wife spoke Spanish, and the fact that they were traveling somewhere so close to home deepened the connection my family had with the First Lutheran community. My connections to the adults in both the projects and the First Lutheran community helped me gain the skills I needed to self-advocate and see the value of mentorship in my life, as well as the value of speaking Spanish that I hoped once in the future to use to help others in my community. With their help, I was able to become more involved in school, participate in school plays as early as 5th grade, get involved in sports as I reached middle school and high school, and just be more of a part of my school community. This was mainly done thanks to the help of those mentors outside of my house, Pastor Male, Mr. Cox, my guidance counselor, and Olga in the project community. Due to the barriers my parents faced in terms of communication and, quite frankly, time, they could not as much get involved in school-based activities with me or my siblings to this day. As you can see, my family and school spheres are not connected. They're close together, but not as much connected. And to this day, I can say those spheres pretty much look the same for my younger siblings. My parents taught me to be educada. To be educada means respecting people, being responsible, and working hard. And they often said, échale ganas, give it your best. Although they could not be involved in my school life, oftentimes due to the barriers of language and time, they were big believers in education. They have always been big on education. My parents both have very little formal education themselves. My mom only completed school through 6th grade, and my dad only completed school through 2nd grade back home. Despite their lack of time in the education system, education has always played an important role in our lives, and I still remember crying with such passion and pride with my dad, both when I crossed the high school stage at graduation and when I crossed the college stage at graduation. My parents are both immigrants from Guatemala who have, for as long as I can remember, worked 2 jobs. They arrived in this country as young adults ready to work and provide a better life for their families back home and their families that they were creating here in this new country. The language and time to be present and involved in the school aspect of my life was never provided for them. So although they have always been very strong, my connections have been very strong with my school community, it hasn't been that way for my home life. so sorry, I got a little lost. But also not to mention the school system is a little bit different here in the United States than it is in Guatemala. So for them to get involved, it was getting involved in a whole new ballpark, and it was just very, very hard for them. I remember being little and needing to translate letters, phone calls, and meetings for my parents because it was difficult for them to understand. I started doing this as early as second grade. I remember just sitting in the principal's office with a teacher, you know, just going over things and needing to translate myself for my parents. As I got older, I remember not even bothering to tell my parents about meetings or events because it was already difficult for them, and I didn't want to burden them with making them feel bad that they couldn't attend or couldn't understand something. As I reached high school, I became very, very independent. I relied heavily on my guidance counselor and teachers to get through high school. I remember filling out my college applications pretty much on my own and sitting in my guidance counselor's office to fill out my financial aid application for college because my parents couldn't even understand what the FAFSA was. And even if they wanted to help me, it would have been very difficult for them. So it was something that I knew I had to do on my own. At the end of the day, I know I was very fortunate to have great leaders and mentors around me, and this became one of the key pieces in motivating me to become an educator myself. In my role as a bilingual school counselor, I hope to continue to help bridge the gap between the home and school spheres of my students and my families. So I know that was a little long, but now we also want you all to kind of think about and reflect on the challenges that maybe you face in your communities when it comes to connecting with your families. Is there a language barrier, a culture barrier, communication, or maybe even training that is missing in your districts that you think may get in the way of, you know, strengthening the home and school spheres for yourself and for your students? So we're going to do one more poll at this time, Dan, if you don't mind. Awesome. Thank you.
Hmm.
Okay. Oh, awesome. All right. So thank you, everybody. Yeah, so it's, you know, pretty much evenly distributed, but communication, cultural differences, lack of training and family engagement. I mean, obviously, as a student, I saw the communication and cultural differences pretty big growing up. And I still, now as an educator myself, I see those I see that as well with my students and other educators. You know, it's really hard. The communication piece is obviously huge. If your family speak another language, it can become very difficult to communicate with them, and you're oftentimes scrambling to find somebody else to help translate for you. And sometimes that may not be enough, right, to make that connection and build that trust with the families. And I think the training piece is also really big. I think you know, our districts overall need to really invest the money and time to train educators properly to be able to have cultural competencies and connect with their families. I don't know, and I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in, but Mary Jo's going to take the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Berta. Berta's narrative is powerful, and she highlights the tensions students of color can undergo continuously when negotiating their education with adults, both at home and at school. Home and school pedagogies, as Berta points out, is a very complex sphere. These overlapping spheres of influence are also not without their criticism. There's one study that has questioned who initiates the partnership. Is it the school? Is it the parent? Or, as in Berta's case, is it the student? And if this is indicative of power relationships. Another study suggests that parent and school relationships need to look at resources in the community, not only to support, but also to educate parents and students. And a third study recognizes that Bronfenbrenner's theory does not actually recognize race, class, and gender. These are variables that are very critical to the study and our practice when addressing communities of color. So thank you to Karen Mapp at Harvard University. Today we have the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships. This framework is meant to assist us in designing family engagement initiatives that build capacity among educators and families to partner with one another, again, around student success. The framework, though, does identify challenges referred to as the 4 C's and that Berta also touched upon. And these are building educators and families' skills and knowledge, meaning becoming culturally responsive. Also building connections, different networks, shifting beliefs and value systems, and finally, enhancing self-efficacy. Translating these 4 C's into the home-school relationship in our context, the challenges would look like what we have here on the slide. Where we have at the home, we have families' social and cultural backgrounds sometimes do not dovetail with that of the school's cultural climate. We also have parents who have had a not favorable experience in schools themselves in their home countries. So this experience, this memory with schooling today can haunt some of our families. And third, there are still some school districts that are still need to work more on welcoming our families in all school buildings. In terms of the school, the challenges schools may face, and it came out here in the poll, is more training of what does family and community engagement look like. Also, what more can educators do to connect more with their students and their families? And what do we need to do to have a deeper understanding of cultures at home so that they can be part of the instructional practice? There's no question that COVID-19 has challenged a traditional perspective of homeschool partnerships. COVID-19 brings to the foreground the need to start to learn how to work more strategically with community partners to ensure greater support and school success for our students. Our community partners have been always present, but I think COVID-19 for me has brought the community members to the foreground, given the fact that our students are living in these communities. And we are also we're hosting education within these spheres, and we need to start to build greater connections with critical strategic people who can actually help us reach students and tighten up the support. So to talk to us more about this, Berta, I'll take it back to you before we start listening to our community partner in this presentation. Berta?
Thank you, Mary Jo. So now we're gonna, as Mary Jo said, we're gonna begin to reflect on the last couple of months and the impact that COVID-19 has had on our personal lives, our professional lives, and our communities. We can maybe start to see our spheres changing a little bit and maybe even drifting further apart. During our time together here, we want to focus on the community agencies and our roles as educators to really dig deeper into how we can bridge these connections and build stronger bonds. Build stronger trust and communication between our schools, our families, and the communities we work with. So like Mary Jo said, Dina, our community leader, is now going to speak about her experience as a community leader and organizer and the importance of building relationships with local agencies to better support our families and our students. And I think we're going to stay on this slide for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Berta. I will say as a community leader, I work with many community agencies. As you can see on this slide, these include the housing department, the hospital, clinics, faith centers, WATCH, CDC, mutual aid in Waltham, Salvation Army, restaurants, and some of the youth programs like Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA. These agencies are valuable in our community today, especially during COVID-19, because they provide housing support, economic support, but also social emotional support. However, as Mary Jo discussed in the slide 9, we can see that challenges are still occurring. I, along with my colleagues, witness how relationships are impacted by racial differences in the community. As Berta reported from her student perspective, she and her immigrant parents experienced many barriers we are talking about today. These include the language, the interpretation, technology literacy, access to Wi-Fi, rental support, and some stressors that we would like to mention, like employment, falling ill, and racial sentiments in the neighborhood. Challenges to the models and theories of family engagement are visible to me and members of my community at the ground level. I want to briefly give you examples of challenges to build and enhance capacity to interact with people of color. Let's start with building a skill and knowledge. Communication is not only about speaking English, it's also about knowing the social linguistic norms of interaction. These include asking questions, sharing concerns, understanding how to prepare for examination. While some people have the skill and knowledge to do this naturally, others don't. From my observation, Latinos view doctors as all-knowing and feel that it's disrespectful to ask any question. And you can see it when they go to the appointments, and you can see it when they need to have any question asked to their doctors. In the other hand, African Americans are more vocal in expressing their concerns and sometimes to ask questions. Knowing about this cultural difference makes a difference when it comes to working with them as a patient or as a student. As a bilingual speaker who has worked in many different healthcare jobs, I have been able to broker language and culture with patients and doctors. I interpret, I translate, and also I explain cultural difference to both Spanish and English speaking community. I feel like I build bridges from homes to health services and to the school system too. For me, it's really important to shift in belief and values, not understanding where we all come from geographically, but also how we do things. It's important to show respect for other people's way of being. It's really important for educators, community and faith leaders, and other agencies to respond culturally to the diverse needs of the neighborhood. While working at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute back in 2013, I was also able to see firsthand how people with diverse backgrounds can work together and elevate the quality of work. However, confidence in walking into public space is not equal to all the populations. Confidence is a challenge many people in the community lack. This is due to the welcoming space and the anti-immigrant rhetoric in our nation today. Unfortunately, many people of color experience fear when entering to health centers and also to the school. I feel it's still undeniable, both in my personal and professional experience, that language and fear are two major variables that make it difficult to building trusting relationships between homes, school, and community agencies. We are really concerned about the lack of sensitivity and awareness to cultures, in particular the case of the Latino culture. These lead to racial injustice that impact building a trusting relationship with the students, with our students and the families.